What is the most supernatural experience you've ever had? This is a story that happened many years ago, around 19 years ago in late 2001. My parents separated in late 2000 and we, my mom, brother, and I, moved into a house next to the local high school. There was a very old tree in the side or front yard, well over 110 years. It's always made the place look creepy, but it was the best place my mom could get on such short notice. It was a 2-story house with a small basement, 2 bedrooms on the upper floor, 1 on the main floor with 1 bathroom. My brother did not live there all the time, but after I turned 18, that was my primary residence with my mom. I had one of the upstairs bedrooms and my brother had the other. My mom used the bedroom on the main floor. A few times while sitting in the living room, I noticed my dog sit at the bottom of the stairs and just stare up. For a while, he would only stare at them, but eventually he started going up the stairs, turned into my bedroom, which was the one on the right side of the stairs, and would go stand in front of my walk-in closet. After a minute or two, he would turn around and come back down the stairs. I could hear his little toes clicking on the hard wood a few times before I finally followed him up to see what he was doing. And there he was, just standing looking at my closet. I did not worry too much about it at the time. My mom had to travel for meetings and conferences, and one weekend she was gone at once. I stayed down on the main floor in her room because my dog usually slept down there anyways, and I wanted to sleep in her big bed. I had settled in for the night and had the dog on the bed with me. The bedroom door was shut and I was reading a little before going to sleep. That was when I heard footsteps upstairs above me, coming from my bedroom. My brother was at my father's house and was too young to drive across town to my mom's. My mom was out of town, and the dog was on the bed next to me. The footsteps went from my bedroom across the short hallway and into my brother's room. They walked around his small bedroom, back across the hallway into my bedroom, and over to where my closet was. I did not get up. I just laid there and tried to fall asleep. I did not tell my mom about it, well, not until years later. Nothing was moved or missing, and I just tried to ignore it. My dog would still stare at the stairs and go up them occasionally. I kinda just pushed it off, and it was a weird occurrence. I told my friend Jay about it though. He suggested bringing in a Ouija board and using it to find out what it was. I figured what could be the harm. So my friends J, C, T, and M and G came over one weekend when my mom was out of town for another week meeting conference. We decided that we would have enough room in the dining room for all of us. The living room was to my right and the kitchen was behind me. Well, we started using the Ouija board and asked just basic questions. It started telling us there was a spirit or ghost of a little girl that lived in the house. It also told us were half a dozen other spirits present that evening, but only the little girl and the main one that was talking to us lived in the house. I asked if the little girl was who I heard walking between my room and my brother's room a few weeks prior. It said yes, and that my mom used to be her room, and my brothers were her playroom. It told us that she had died from the house due to abuse of some kind. I asked if she was what my dog keeps following upstairs, and it said yes. She hides in my closet sometimes. The majority of the time we were talking to an older male spirit. He told us that he's been hung on a branch of the large old tree that sat right outside the home. I asked him where he was about the rest of us. He said that he was in the living room. I said that he should come into the dining room with the rest of us. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. My dog was sleeping on the couch in the living room during this. All of a sudden, he jumped off the couch and came into the dining room, sitting down on the floor next to me and just looking at me. I asked if he was in my dog, and it replied, yes. I panicked at this point and yelled for it to get out of my dog. It said I asked for him to come in there, and I yelled back, but not using my dog. Well, my dog got back up and went into the living room and lay down again. We continued to talk to the spirit after this for a while at the point. It mentioned that there was no good spirits behind me in the kitchen and that it was keeping them there. My friend C said that she did not believe it. It warned her not to go in there. She went over to the swinging door and tried to push on it, and the door would not move, so she pushed again and the door opened. But she was unable to put her foot across the threshold. She looked back to us and said, "I'm not fucking around. I literally can't move my foot into the kitchen." The board again told her not to go in there, and she pulled her foot back and sat down at the table. We asked if it would get the bad spirits out of the house after we were done talking, and it said yes, that it would. We decided to close the conversation and parted ways for the night. I slept down in my mom's room again because I did not feel like being upstairs alone with whatever was in there by myself. Until we moved out, the dog would follow something up the stairs a few times a month. I never saw anything, but I would get those weird feelings that someone was watching me sometimes. A few times when I was in the bathroom, I would hear low voices talking that I could never make out what was being said. We moved out about a year and a half later, by the way. After we moved into my mom's new house, the dog never stared at the stairs and wandered up them on his own. I never heard random voices that should not have been there. The house has been torn down now, and I want to say in the last year or two. It was so weird. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house. Both of my parents worked long hours, so her place became a second home. She was a tough old woman, rail thin but strong. Sometimes I'd watch her going about her routine and wonder if she was some kind of witch. She just had a witchy way about her, but of course, that might just be what resourcefulness looks like to a kid. Anyways, her house did not help. It was old. Everything in it was old, and it was dark. I don't know how to best describe it any other way than to say I always felt that being inside my grandma's house wasn't much different from being outside of it. And any season, the windows in the house would stay jammed open with old bent screens, which had to be shimmed into place with old slats from some discarded louver door. Grandma had this rusty pot-belly stove smack in the middle of her bedroom. I remember constantly dodging it as I ran through the house playing. At night, she'd load the stove with one great big chunk of hickory, and you could see the flames licking through the cracks. I'd lay on the floor with my sleeping bag positioned myself so that the stove was in between me and my grandmother's bed. Facing this direction meant that I could easily see the window at the foot of her bed. It was like a night light for me. Everything in that house was black at night unless there was a window nearby. So, there I lay one night and man, it was chilly. And I remember having trouble sleeping because the moonlight coming through the window was so bright. It was late, which meant the stove was not roaring anymore. Besides my grandma's breathing, the whole house was dead silent. It was just the two of us and no one else was home. Without any warning, a tall black figure calmly walks into the shadows of the far side of the room. He passed between the stove and the bed across the floor just a foot from my head. And out through the doorway into the kitchen, I was petrified. I could not even move an inch. This may sound crazy, but I had the feeling that a burglar was in the house. I'd like to think I would have moved or shouted or something. I did not think it was a burglar though. No specific reason why, it just felt wrong. I don't think I fell asleep that night. All I remember is staring at the kitchen doorway for a long time. When my grandma woke up, she rolled out of bed and grabbed the fire poker. I sat up and began to tell her what I saw. Like I said, I always felt like my grandma was a little bit witchy. After I finished telling her about the tall man, she just poked the coals on the stove and said, haven't seen him in a long time. Granny was mysterious beyond my understanding. She was so small, but when I was near her, I could almost feel her strength. Being around her felt like being tethered to a different time. She sometimes sat on a porch swing just gazing out into the woods. It sounds nuts, but I always feared interrupting her because it seemed like she was listening to something or someone. When she said she hadn't seen the man in a long time, it did comfort me in a way. I knew Granny was fearless and hardened. But laying there all night, I was afraid that she may herself be frightened once I told her what I saw. She treated it no differently than any one of her morning chores. Oh, You saw a ghost? Big whoop. She did mention George more when I was older. It was her way of explaining something strange. George was blamed for nearly everything that sounded or looked off. She never explained further. There was spooky stories from a lot of them, the uncles, cousins, and children who grew up on the farm. Many served in the wars and many's imbibed on the regular. Some passed on early. I think living on a hard life made them all closer to the other side, if that's such a thing. Not sure if this counts as supernatural, but here it goes. The summer after I graduated high school, I got a job delivering pizza to help save for money for college. I had a lot of run-ins with some pretty weird characters, but nothing like happened this night. It was a Friday night, and we delivered pizzas until 3 a.m., Friday and Saturdays. It was 2:45, and we were preparing to close when our manager said we got a call for delivery at a place almost 20 minutes away. Being desperate for the money, a teenager that I was, I offered to do the delivery. This was before smartphones and GPS, so I used a Garmin. I plugged in the address and off I went. The Garmin took me deep into the back roads of rural Texas. I finally arrived at my destination. The house looked like something in a horror movie. Big wooded 2-story house with no lights on. The first thing I noticed about the house was that the front door was wide open. I sat in my car for a few minutes debating on turning back and claiming no one was home. Something just did not feel right. I needed the tip money, so I sucked it up and approached the house. When I got to the open front door, I did not enter. Instead, I knocked. No one answered. I knocked again as loud as I could, but no response. I finally got the courage to say something. Pizza delivery, anyone home? There was a few seconds of silence until I heard a voice. Upstairs. I walked into the house and could barely make out my surroundings because it was so dark. I make it to the bottom of the stairs and look up into the dark abyss. Again, I said, Pizza delivery. The voice spoke once more. Come upstairs. I can't get out of the bed. Something was very off about this voice, and it did not sound normal. The best I can describe is it's a dog somehow learned to talk but still had trouble pronouncing human words. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and there was no fucking way I was going up there. The tip wasn't worth it. I placed the pizza at the bottom of the stairs and shouted, I'm leaving it here at the bottom of the stairs. Have a good night. As I turned away, the voice said, No, come upstairs. Can't get out of bed. I replied, I'm sorry. I'm not even allowed to enter someone's home on the job. You'll have to come and get it. I heard some loud banging from the upstairs with a voice shouting at full volume, Come upstairs, I can't get out of bed. The voice shouted this over and over again like it was a recording on a loop. The banging got louder and louder as the voice got louder. I noped the fuck out of there at full speed. To this day, I have no idea what the fuck happened in that house. My grandfather loves my grandmother a lot. He would constantly tell her she was beautiful and would always do embarrassing things to make her laugh. Unfortunately, she died a few months after being diagnosed with cancer. This affected him a lot, but as time went on, he came to terms with it. My grandfather lived on for another 18 years. In his final years, he developed bad Alzheimer's that led him to forget that his wife had passed away and would often call for her and ask where she went. We'd explained to him that she passed away, but it always made him distressed and upset, so we decided to tell him she'll be back soon every time he asked where she was. A month or so before my grandfather passed away, I was at his house with my mother, and we were all sitting in the living room. My grandfather, who was seated on his chair, all of a sudden starts frantically asking where my grandmother was. We calmly explained to him that she'll be back soon and that she was just out doing some chores. Unlike most times, he was persistent in wanting to see her. We explained to him again that she'll be back soon, but he kept getting more persistent. He started to frantically call for her. He screamed her name as loud as he could over and over until out of nowhere, every single door and window in the room flung open all at once. Now, We could say that it was just wind, but all the doors and windows in the house had secure locks and would stay locked at all times since my grandfather would wander off or forget to lock his doors. All the doors and windows burst open, and at that same second, my grandfather, who was facing the front door, says, "What took you so long? I've been waiting for you," with a giant smile on his face. My mother and I did not see the person my grandfather talked to, but I'm sure that it was his wife. I have two stories. When I was 15, sitting in our downstairs living room while my parents slept in their bedroom upstairs. It was around 1 a.m. or so, and I was on the computer playing a video game. The only light in the house comes from my computer screen and a lamp that's opposite of me by the couch. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say my name very plainly. Not a whisper, not a yell, just a mid-level call that sounds like it's coming from the darkened hallway. I assume it's my dad because sometimes he comes down the stairs and calls at me for the lower step to tell me to get to bed or whatever. I get up and go into the hallway, but no one's there. I look up the stairs and call lightly to my dad, but then I hear his telltale snore from upstairs. A bit weirded out, I go back to the computer. A minute later, I hear the voice call my name again, but this time, it's as if the person is speaking right beside me, and the voice is a bit more assertive. I jump and look into the direction of the voice. Nothing is there. Suddenly, the lamp across from the room starts to hum, and the light flickers on and off until the light bulb explodes. I got pretty unnerved at this point, and I turned on all the downstairs lights, cleaned up the burst bulb, and went upstairs to sleep. The second story was in a past. I was about 8 or 9 and was getting ready for bed in my room. I was sitting on my bed taking off my socks when suddenly got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I knew of the feeling but had never experienced it myself. I felt for sure that something with bad intentions was standing over against the wall between my closet and my closet door, watching me. A feeling of terror washed over me and I sat there for a while. It felt like an hour, but probably just a few minutes, staring at the floor, unable to move, paralyzed with fear. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to look up, reasoning that what I was feeling was silly. I knew that once I looked up and saw that nothing was there, the feeling would go away. It did not. I looked up and felt even more terrified that nothing was there. But I couldn't stop shaking the feeling that I had locked eyes with some malevolent, invisible force. After another minute, frozen unblinking, I stood and made my way slowly towards the presence, trying to decide whether to bolt out the door or face it. I decided to approach it. Eventually, I felt as if I was face to face with whatever this thing was, and the feeling of presence was as strong as ever. I raised my hand, paused, and then thrust it forward. I felt a bit surprised when my fist hit the wall. The feeling of being watched suddenly disappeared and I felt alone again. I've never had that feeling again. When I was between the ages of 4 and 6, I used to see a little blonde boy through this mirrored arm wire in my parents' bedroom. The arm wire was big and wooden but had mirrored accents and mirrors running around the base. If I lay on the carpet in front of it and looked into the mirrors on the bottom, sometimes I'd see a little blonde boy in a red sweater in the corner of the room, far away and a little disordered but still very clear. He would sit with his back to me looking at the windows to the backyard. I don't remember ever seeing his face. I don't think I saw him many times, but I do remember his image very clearly. In my little kid's mind, I thought I invented this super neat mirror trick by myself, so I tried to get my parents to see it too. They always refused, and my mom especially would get super mad at me for asking. I stopped seeing the boy when I stopped playing in the bedroom as much, and new mirrors should not work like that. When I got older, I chalked it up to my overactive kid brain. I did not think much of it, to be honest. Well, years and years later, when I was an adult and long after my parents have sold that house, my mom asked me about the arm wire out of the blue and then told me that she used to see the little boy too. Not in the mirrors, but sometimes just out of the corner of her eyes. Like She'd be cooking and catch a glimpse of the blonde hair pass by her hips as a kid's height, and occasionally in her dreams. It did not happen too often, but just enough to deeply freak them out, so when I mentioned seeing the same little boy, my mom was terrified. There was other strange stuff in the house, but this was 100% the most vivid I remember. My aunt and uncle owned a house that had quite a history. It was a funeral home, a hospital, and a sanatorium long before they bought it, with the dream of turning it into a bed and breakfast. 3 instances stick out. We were emptying the basement of an old trash and we found a false wall revealing a secret cabinet with a hand in a jar. No idea what the hell it was all about, but later on the day, we were all eating pizza and my cousins and I were wandering around and ended up at the base of the stairs to the basement, where we could hear what sounded like children whispering and laughing. My cousins and I were going to clean the boxes out of the attic. It was pitch black, so my cousin grabs a flashlight and starts to head up. As soon as he gets into the attic, the flashlight dies. He comes down and it works again, but when he gets into the attic, it dies once more. He climbed down, shined the light on the wall, and into the attic, where again, the light died. The light just would not shine in that attic. And this is the last one. My cousins and I were in the balcony room. Supposedly it belonged to a rich elderly lady who was dying of tuberculosis, and paid for this room to be redone with a walkout balcony overseeing the town. My cousins and I walked over the edge of the balcony and gazed out when all of a sudden, the door, about 15 feet away, slammed shut. It was the dead of winter and there was no wind. It slammed with so much force, I had to throw my shoulder into it to open the door again. My uncle, who was downstairs working, did not hear a thing. There were a few other weird, unexplained things that happened, but those 3 just stick out to me 10 years later. This was in the mid-2000s. I was sleeping in my room with my girlfriend at the time, and my mom's house. I was about, 25. It was sometime after midnight and we both started to wake up with the sound of a loud, angry voice, engaged in some kind of fiery argument downstairs. Most of the discussion was impossible to hear save for the occasional F-bomb or other swear words. It was intense, and we both looked at each other, in shock I believe. I truly thought our house was being burglarized. My mom was sleeping down the hall and I did not hear her stirring. I told my girlfriend to use my cell phone and call 911 if she heard me getting into it with whoever was in our home. I grabbed my pistol loaded from my desk and tried to slink downstairs. The voices cut off as soon as I left my bedroom. The house was quiet as I banked a left to turn top of the stairs. I listened for noises and heard nothing. I descended the stairs, cursing every loose floorboard in that old house. The moment I landed on the first floor, I began clearing the rooms and flicking lights on as I went. My heart was racing. I was sure that at any moment I would be face to face with people I had heard moments before. But the entire house was empty. The TV was off and the DVD player was unplugged. The front door remained locked and bolted and the motion lights had not been activated. All the windows were shut, making it less likely that the noise could have been coming from some sort of domestic disturbance in the neighborhood. There was just no way to rationalize what I heard. If it was just me that heard it, I would have attributed it to one of my usual nightmares as I'm a veteran, diagnosed with PTSD. But the fact that we both woke up and we both heard it made me feel a bit more uneasy. There's probably some very rational explanation, but I truly believe there was some dark energy at play in that house. My mother said she felt it on several occasions coming from the coat closet on the main floor. When she would reach for a coat, she felt like something wanted to shut her in there. My brother reportedly saw a phantom, or a ghost, floating above him after he woke in the afternoon. He's not the type to make this sort of stuff up, and he parted with the story very reluctantly. I believed everyone had an experience there. Weird. In the United Kingdom, it's pretty common to be able to stay in a holiday cottage on the grounds of old, stately homes. Usually it's the gardener's cottage or converted stables or something like that. Now, my parents are huge history nerds, so most of the childhood holidays were in these old, we're talking 500 years plus cottages. On one of these holidays, we stayed in an old caretaker's cottage with an amazing old-fashioned claw-foot bathtub that little 8-year-old me was obsessed with. I used to spend hours in a massive bath every night, playing with bubbles and rubber ducks. I used to sit in bath facing away from the toilet and towards the door, but on the second week of the holiday, I decided to change things up a bit and sit the other way around. Standing where the toilet was the ghost of this black guy who had been whacked over the head with something. He was covered in blood and he had a noose around his neck. Despite this, he was just standing there very calmly, staring right at me. Felt like he was staring right into my soul. Obviously, I was terrified and ran out of the bathroom as quickly as I could and never had another bath in that holiday cottage again. Of course, my parents tried to calm me down and managed to convince me that I just imagined it. But there's still no way in hell I was getting in that bathtub again. Just before we left the cottage on our last day, we were writing in the guest book and a leaflet about the cottage fell out. It turned out the black servant was working as the caretaker of this old stately home, and the nearby villages felt that he was too above his station and killed him. He was injured in the same way as the ghost I saw. Now, I had never seen this leaflet or read anything else about this guy before, so to read the details of the murder and have them exactly matched up with the ghost I'd seen, my blood ran cold. I was very skeptical as a kid, but I really could not think of any other explanation than it being the guy's ghost. Midnight Monster here. That was 9 stories of the most supernatural experiences ever. If you have a supernatural experience you would like to share, drop it in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel for more videos, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.